financially burnt out from chasing complex protocols, juggling work, caregiving, and their own symptoms. And on top of that, they're being told that they need a dozen lab tests and 15 different supplements just to get started. If you've been diagnosed with hyperthyroidism or Hashimoto's, I don't need to tell you how overwhelming the journey can feel. I've worked with so many people who are trying to heal while also feeling stretched financially as well as emotionally. You don't need to spend a fortune to start moving the needle in your health. And that's why in this episode, I want to break it down and simplify the process. I am going to discuss how to eat healthy and restore your thyroid and immune system health on a budget. I do recommend trying to eat as many organic foods as possible, but obviously organic food does cost more. So if you're on a budget, you might need to prioritize. If you eat meat, I would try to eat organic. Let's talk about supplements. So how can you prioritize nutritional supplements? Because supplements definitely get expensive. And as I mentioned, so I'll walk you through what to focus on first, where micronutrients come in, and how to move forward without feeling like you're drowning in information or expenses. So I've seen it so many times. Those who want to heal naturally, but they're financially burnt out from chasing complex protocols. They're juggling work, caregiving, and their own symptoms. And on top of that, they're being told that they need a dozen lab tests and 15 different supplements just to get started. Now, don't get me wrong, as without question, I recommend tests as well as supplements to my patients. And this is true with most functional medicine practitioners. So this isn't about doing everything. It's about doing what matters first. And you don't need to spend a fortune to start moving the needle in your health. So when you're deficient in key vitamins and minerals, it's like trying to rebuild your house with no materials. So micronutrients play a role in calming the immune response. They can support thyroid function, even help with detoxification. And the good news is that you don't need to take dozens of supplements to address these micronutrients. Now, sure, there is a time and place for supplementation, such as magnesium, selenium, vitamin B12, vitamin D, and I do commonly recommend these as well as other supplements to my patients. But you also need to incorporate the foundations, which includes eating whole, healthy foods. And that's where you want to start. You always want to start with whole, healthy foods. And a question that a lot of people have is, do you absolutely need to eat organic? I do recommend trying to eat as many organic foods as possible, but obviously organic food does cost more. So if you're on a budget, you might need to prioritize. If you eat meat, I would try to eat organic. If you can't, let's say if you eat red meats, but you can't afford organic, grass-fed, grass-finished beef, I would at least make sure it's still, even if it's grass-fed, grass-finished, but it's not organic, that's still really good. Arguably, that might be even better just to have, if you had a choice between organic, but not grass-fed, grass-finished, or non-organic, grass-fed, grass-finished. Again, I think eating beef that's 100% grass-fed is a priority. But again, even in that situation, would it be the end of the world if every now and then you eat some beef that's not 100% grass-fed, grass-finished? Well, not the end of the world, but again, you just want to try to do your best. And it's similar with fruits and vegetables. When it comes to fruits and vegetables, for the most part, I'm eating organic, but you could always refer to the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15 list from the Environmental Working Group, which you could check out by visiting ewg.org. And if you're not familiar with these lists, the Dirty Dozen lists the top 12 fruits and vegetables with the greatest amount of pesticides, while the Clean 15 lists the top 15 fruits and vegetables with the least amount of pesticides. And they're not perfect. There really is no perfect list out there. But if you're on a budget and you can't afford to purchase all organic fruits and vegetables, then you would at the very least want to try to avoid the foods that are on the Dirty Dozen list, or it's the fruits and vegetables on the Dirty Dozen list, and then stick with the fruits and vegetables that are on the Clean 15 list, at least the allowed foods. So if you've read my books, Hyperthyroid Healing Diet, Hashimoto's Triggers, again, I recommend either like an AIP type diet or a Paleo type diet. So not all of those foods on the Clean 15 list are AIP or even Paleo friendly. And besides food, don't overlook the importance of stress management and proper sleep. So, I mean, these are the foundations: eating whole, healthy foods, avoiding refined foods and sugars and fast food, and stress management, proper sleep, extremely important. Now, sometimes you might need to work on other aspects of your life to get proper sleep. So for example, it's easy to say, well, if you're not sleeping at least 7 to 8 hours, just start getting that much sleep. But sometimes it's not that simple. You might need to correct blood sugar imbalances, which could relate to the diet that we just spoke about. And again, I didn't get into specific with the diets because I discussed this in other episodes and again in my books. But then also minimizing blue light at night, for example, if you're on your phone, your smartphone at night, an hour or two before going to bed, or on your computer, or even watching TV, that could cause problems with sleep. So minimizing at least an hour before going to bed, I would say try to not go on electronic devices. I can't say I always do that, but if you are struggling with sleep, then again, you want to do everything you can. And it doesn't cost any money to not go on your phone or your computer. So again, we'll talk about what you could do on a budget. I mean, honestly, I recommend for everyone to do that, even if you're not on the budget, to avoid the blue light right before going to bed. Again, most nights, if I'm conducting a webinar at night, then again, I might not follow that rule. And there are other times when I'm guilty of not following that. But again, I do try not to go on my phone right before going to bed, or worse, like in the bed. A lot of people will bring their phone in the bed and they'll like surf the internet or whatever, text some people right before going to bed. So I would try to get out of that habit if that describes you. Getting some morning sunlight whenever possible. I realize not everybody could get morning sunlight every single day, but when there is morning sunlight, going outside first thing in the morning for a few minutes and getting sunlight, that could help to reset your circadian rhythm, and that really can make a big difference. Also, should mention grounding, like going outside barefoot for just even a minute or two. But if you're doing it for longer than that, so that'd be great. Or you could get a grounding mat. So again, just the basics is what I'm talking about here, the foundations. Let's talk about supplements. So how can you prioritize nutritional supplements? Because supplements definitely get expensive. And as I mentioned, I do recommend supplements to my patients. So I'd be a hypocrite if I said, don't take any supplements, just rely on food, diet, and lifestyle. Again, if you can't afford supplements, then definitely, I mean, either way, you want to focus on diet and lifestyle. But I do think that supplements can be helpful. And what I would say is focus on nutrients first. And the reason for that is because you can have, for example, an omega-3 fatty acid deficiency, but you can't have a turmeric deficiency. So there's great things about turmeric, curcumin, helping with inflammation. I commonly recommend, not always in supplement form, but even through like food to get turmeric. But either way, turmeric, curcumin is great. But like I said, you're not going to have a deficiency in turmeric, but you definitely can, and many people do have a deficiency in omega-3 fatty acids. Many people have a vitamin D deficiency, which is more of a prohormone than a vitamin. But the point is that you want to focus on nutrients first, nutrients that you can become deficient in. When it comes to basic supplements that I recommend to many of my patients, again, fish oils, or if you're vegan, vegetarian, then it might be algae oil, but an omega-3 fatty acid supplement. And you could also do a test. You could do an omega-3 index, for example, which of course that involves more money. So if you're on a budget, you might not want to spend the money on that, but there is a company, Omega Quant, and I think it's like $55 or $60 to do that test. You could do a more comprehensive fatty acid profile. But if you really want to see if you're deficient, you could test. But if you're not taking fish oils, or if you're not taking an omega-3 fatty acid supplement, and you're not eating fish at least 3 times a week, you probably are deficient. But if you want to test, that option is out there. Again, vitamin D, most people, if they're not supplementing with vitamin D, they're deficient. But there are some people who are able to have healthy vitamin D levels by getting regular sunlight. So if you're getting regular sun, either way, I recommend testing. That's the only way to know for sure. So if you're getting regular sunlight, you can't assume that your vitamin D levels are optimal, not just within lab range, but optimal. So you would want to test vitamin D. Selenium, magnesium are ones that, again, I commonly recommend to patients. I also recommend probiotics. You can try to get as many probiotics as you can through fermented foods like sauerkraut, but I like not only probiotics, but it's great to rotate probiotics. And the problem with fermented foods, most people aren't eating them every day. And if they are, many times they're eating the same fermented foods. So again, if they're eating sauerkraut, that's what they're eating every day. Maybe they get eating also unsweetened coconut yogurt, for example, but they might not be getting enough of the probiotics from that and even sauerkraut. So I recommend doing both. If you're willing to eat fermented foods, great. But probiotics, which again, I realize probiotics are expensive, but that is one thing I do commonly recommend. Now, prebiotics are something that I can't say everybody needs prebiotics, especially if you're getting prebiotics through the diet by eating fiber-rich foods, especially vegetables. But there are some good quality, inexpensive prebiotics. So I don't like Now Foods for all their supplements, but I do like their prebiotics. They have certified organic inulin and certified organic acacia fiber, which are, so those are prebiotics I personally add to my smoothies. And again, they're cost effective. Digestive enzyme is something I commonly recommend. The one I recommend also has betaine HCl, just because a lot of people have low stomach acid. For detox, the biggest thing is to reduce your toxic burden. The biggest thing is to minimize exposure to environmental toxins in your home. Again, eating organic can help with that, or at least avoiding the dirty dozen list, trying to use natural cleaners and cosmetics. Again, I realize that could also become expensive, but at least prioritize the cleaners and cosmetics that you use on a day in, day out basis and try to make those natural. So for example, if you're using a cleaner in the house where you clean the tables, for example, again, use a natural cleaner. You don't have to spend like $20 on a natural cleaner. You could get a good natural cleaner for like a spray, like for $5, for example. But if you're using just like the conventional sprays like 409 or Clorox wipes, again, I would minimize. I'm not saying there's never a time and place for these, but just again, the products that you use on a daily basis, I would try to make them natural. If you are looking to do everything you can to save your thyroid, in addition to watching my videos on YouTube, you also might want to subscribe to my free online newsletter, which is called Healthy Gut, Healthy Thyroid. Not only will you get the latest news on how to heal your gut and restore your thyroid health, but during each edition, I'll demonstrate a different blood or functional medicine test marker that relates to healing your gut and or your thyroid. There will also be an Ask Dr. Eric section where not only can you see questions that other people have asked related to gut and thyroid health, but you can also submit a question for me to answer in a future edition. To subscribe to the Healthy Gut, Healthy Thyroid newsletter, please visit savemythyroid.com/newsletter. And for supplement purposes, NAC, N-acetylcysteine, is great for detoxification. It's a precursor to glutathione, which is the master antioxidant and helps to support phase 2 detoxification. I also have a supplement, Hepatoimmune Supreme, which is great and has NAC, but again, it is a little bit on the pricey side. So NAC is a really good option for a lot of people. Sweating, again, sauna is great, but if you don't have a sauna, you could sweat in other ways, like exercise, for example. Now, you do want to be careful with the exercise, especially if you have hyperthyroidism and an elevated resting heart rate. But point is, there is a lot you can do to reduce your toxic burden without taking a lot of supplements. Let's talk about testing. So basic blood test, thyroid, TSH would be the most basic, but TSH is actually a pituitary hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone is pituitary and not a thyroid hormone. But there is a company, Direct Labs. They offer like a comprehensive wellness panel that has a TSH, has CBC, complete blood count, comprehensive metabolic panel, lipid panel, a few other markers. And I think the regular price is like $100, but they have sales every now and then where it's like $60 or $70. But I really do recommend a thyroid panel, not just looking at TSH. So looking at the T3, the T4. I prefer the free hormones. So free T3, free T4. If you can test the antibodies. Now, again, if you're paying out of pocket, it could get expensive testing antibodies on a regular basis. So I would say, if you can, at least do a thyroid panel, so like a TSH, free T3, free T4 every other month. And then if you absolutely have to, do antibodies every other time you do a blood test, which would be like every 4 months. Again, you could only do what you could do. You might hear me and others talk about reverse T3. If you have hyperthyroidism, so Graves, toxic multinodular goiter, most of the time reverse T3 will be elevated. So you don't really need reverse T3 if you're dealing with hyperthyroidism. And honestly, I wouldn't say it's absolutely essential with Hashimoto's. I mean, it's great to have, but is it a must have? I would say in many cases, no. So don't feel bad if you can't afford reverse T3. Again, vitamin D, I would try to get a vitamin D. I recommend an iron panel, not because a lot of people are deficient, but I mean, that is one reason why, but some people have elevated iron levels. So they might have hemochromatosis, or there might be other reasons why the iron is elevated, which is not good. If you have too much iron, that will cause oxidative stress. And obviously, if you have too little iron, that's not good either. And you don't want to just randomly take iron. You want to see if your iron, because again, if you randomly take iron and if you happen to have hemochromatosis, which you can't go by symptoms necessarily, then that could make things worse. And there, of course, are other blood tests I like, blood tests that look at blood sugar imbalances like hemoglobin A1C, fasting insulin, inflammatory markers such as C-reactive protein, homocysteine. But again, I'm trying to keep it basic. So you could only do what you can do. And so if you could just do a thyroid panel, vitamin D, iron panel, again, I mean, it's obviously the more you could do, the better, but doing those, I would say, are pretty important. And then when it comes to functional medicine tests, I've always been more on the conservative side when it comes to functional medicine testing. Again, there's a time and place for comprehensive testing, and it really depends on the person. So I'm not saying I'll never recommend comprehensive testing, because there are times when I do, but I won't recommend thousands of dollars worth of tests for everyone. And when I dealt with Graves, I did, in addition to blood tests, I did do comprehensive blood tests, and then I did an adrenal saliva test. I did a hair mineral analysis test, and that's it. I didn't do a comprehensive stool panel or organic acids test or mold test, like tests for mycotoxins. Some people do need those tests, but it's perfectly fine to start off with the basics, to start off conservatively. And like I said, that's what I did. And a lot of my patients also start off conservatively. But again, sometimes I'll look at someone's health history and might suspect mold, or there'll be gut issues, and I will recommend a comprehensive stool panel or a urinary mycotoxins test or another type of test. So it really does depend on the person, but don't think that you need to spend thousands of dollars on functional medicine testing, because many times that's not the case. And I guess for the most part, that's what I want to discuss here. Again, getting back to the toxic burden, I would just assume you're toxic. I mean, again, hair mineral analysis does look at heavy metals such as mercury and aluminum, and there's urinary testing for heavy metals. And I mentioned mycotoxins testing. So the thing is with testing for toxins is you can't test for all toxins anyway. There's too many toxins to test for. So, I mean, you could always assume you're toxic, because really we all are toxic, we all just have different toxic burdens. And so do things to reduce your toxic burden. Try to do as much as you can through diet. Cruciferous vegetables are really good for supporting phase 2 detoxification. I spoke about cruciferous vegetables in previous podcast episodes. Just again, a lot of controversy with cruciferous vegetables such as broccoli and thyroid health, but most people, it's fine to eat cruciferous vegetables. Of course, you want to stay well hydrated, drink plenty of water. I mentioned N-acetylcysteine if you want to take a supplement. So I also should mention some free or low-cost resources. Of course, there's this podcast and my YouTube channel. I have a few websites. So savemythyroid.com is my newer website that's been out since I launched my podcast in 2021. But I also have one, naturalendocrinesolutions.com, that's been out since 2010. And that's where I have hundreds of articles and blog posts related to thyroid health, both hyperthyroidism, Graves, hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, and also the transcripts to the main podcast, like the Tuesday podcast, are on that website as well. I have a new newsletter called Healthy Gut, Healthy Thyroid. You could check that out by visiting savemythyroid.com/newsletter. And then I have 3 books, which aren't free, but they're lower cost. So Natural Treatment Solutions for Hyperthyroidism and Graves' Disease, which is now it's in its 3rd edition. Hashimoto's Triggers, as well as the Hyperthyroid Healing Diet. You can check those out on Amazon. And then support. So it's great to have information. But there are also some free or low cost support. My Facebook groups, there's a lot of people with, pretty much they're exclusive to those with thyroid, autoimmune thyroid conditions. I can't say I'm too active in there just because I have a lot of other things besides work with patients, trying to keep up with the podcast. And so there's only so much time I have. But again, there's a lot of people in there dealing with thyroid, autoimmune thyroid conditions. Of course, you need to be careful to take medical advice from these people who are not practitioners, but it's also, it is nice to be in a group where others are going through the same thing that you are. Now, I do have occasional Facebook Lives, no longer in the group. They used to be live streams directly in the group, but then Facebook changed that and it doesn't allow that anymore. So now when I do it's not really a Facebook Live, I guess you could say. It's I live stream to my Facebook page, my YouTube channel, and more recently Instagram. Instagram, I just got on last year, 2024, after years of not being on Instagram. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll just be on Instagram. So again, sometimes I'll do those lives where I'll answer questions. So be on the lookout for that. If you're on my email list, then you'll get those alerts. And I also have live events a few times a year that are either free or low cost. So typically, I have a few like 5-day challenges or boot camps. And then when they're paid, usually they're less than $100. There's sometimes exceptions to that, but again, I try to make them affordable. So be on the lookout for those. If you're on my Facebook groups, I do post them. The problem with the Facebook groups is when I post something, not everybody sees them. I have in one group like 9,000 people, the other group over 20,000 people, and only a small number of those people will see it. So definitely get on my email list, and you can do that by visiting savemythyroid.com or naturalendocrinesolutions.com. And then there are options like if you go to savemythyroid.com, there's a quiz that you could take, and then you'll be on my email list. There's also, if you visit naturalendocrinesolutions.com, there's a free guide. And then if you request a free guide, you'll be on my list and you'll get the alert. So those are ways to be on my list and be informed of when I do like a live, like a Facebook Live, or again, shouldn't call it a Facebook Live, but a live where I'm answering questions, or again, live events, like a 3 to 5 day live event where I provide information and also answer questions. So that is really all I want to discuss here. So hopefully you found this to be valuable. Again, you definitely could eat healthy and do things to restore your thyroid, your immune system health on a budget. Again, can it be more challenging with some people? Yeah, it definitely can. But you can only do what you could do. And I just wanted to make you aware that there are things that you can do, because some people feel like, hey, that they need to spend thousands of dollars to restore their health. And again, I realize not everybody's in a position to work with me or another functional medicine practitioner. Functional medicine is not cheap. I understand that. So again, I wanted to put together an episode where I give you some information as well as some of these low-cost resources as well as support. So hope you found this episode to be valuable. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to catching you in the next episode.